lower self and higher self. Nothing is just good or bad. Every person, organization, movement group, or company on earth has a light side and a shadow side, a dual nature. The shadow side is usually covered up instead of integrated. And it's the cover up of the shadow side that takes the most energy away from the light side. And that's how every corporation or politician will do their utmost to cover up their shadow side, their dark side, and promote their light side. And if you criticize that, consider that most of us do the same thing as individuals, like on social media, where we show our brightest side and mask the dark side, the shadow. The lower self and higher self exercise is a process that I use in most of my coaching work and have for the last 20 plus years. And it helps to integrate the shadow side while at the same time enhancing your light side, your good side, through becoming very aware, very conscious of when you are acting from your lower self and when you're acting from your higher self. It's a very simple exercise and a very simple concept with profound effects on your daily and real life. In order to discover the shadow side of yourself, you have to look behind the curtains, behind the closed doors. Just like when you're in a restaurant, what you see out in front is the light side. And if you go back into the kitchen and into the restrooms of the restaurant, you might find the shadow side of it. And isn't it nice when you find that the shadow side, the hidden part of the restaurant, is all cleaned up and tidy? Wouldn't it be nice if in your life there were nothing to mask and nothing to hide? Because fact is, every lie eventually gets revealed. Even if it's suppressed for some time, it takes so much energy and effort to hide and mask things. Often, the very things you try to hide are amplified because of that, because of your resistance. So let's get right into the first part of this exercise. On your screen, you see a chart saying lower self and higher self. And I'd like you now to write down the facial expression you have in your lower self versus the facial expression you might have in your higher self, good mood, bad mood. The voice you have when you're coming from your lower self, and the voice you have when you're coming from your higher self. For example, when I'm in my lower self, when I'm in a bad mood, bad energy, my voice is usually more thin than this. The pitch is a little bit higher. That means I'm tense. I'm not fully calm and not fully myself when I'm tense. Whereas in my higher self, my voice sounds about the way it sounds right now, deep and calm. And then, is there a difference in your way of moving and walking in lower self versus higher self? Is there a difference in the vocabulary you use? Is your speaking more conscious and higher self? So here I'd like you to discern. And you discern by writing it down. You become aware. Do you dress differently in lower self versus higher self? I know I do. When I'm not in a good energy, not in a good flow, my dressing is completely random. I don't put any care into it. There's a bit of self-neglect there. Whereas in my higher self, I pay attention to what I wear, consciously choose what I wear to enhance my already good mood. What are your interests in lower self and your interests in higher self? Your activities in both selves? What are your typical thoughts in both selves? What are your emotions in both selves? What are the typical places you go to in either self? Places you find yourself in? Have you ever noticed how when you're in a good state, you're attracted to certain places, and when you're in a bad state, you suddenly find yourself in certain situations? And have you noticed that each self, lower and higher self, is attracted to certain websites, certain foods? And what is your sense of time in lower self versus higher self? What is your body posture in lower self and higher self? And this is by no means a complete list. You're very welcome to expand the list with observations of your own. You might have certain reactions in lower self versus higher self. You might hang out with certain people in lower self versus higher self. So there are many more items you could add, and I recommend you do so. And that's the first part of the exercise. Put this recording on pause to do it. Now, what I've done in the last 30 years of my coaching work is I've had people intentionally create their lower self behavior in alteration with their higher self behavior. So I'm sitting there as a coach and I say, okay, show me the lower self facial expression. Thank you. Now show me the higher self facial expression. Thank you. Now show me again the lower self facial expression. Thank you. And show me the higher self facial expression. Thank you. And you might be wondering why I go back and forth like this. It's because the more often you switch it on and off intentionally, the more you gain conscious control of it so that it no longer happens from the shadows, subconsciously, but consciously. It's under your conscious control. It no longer appears automatically. You've taken control of your shadow. You're no longer suppressing it into the subconscious where it's as if it pops up automatically. And that's what makes this one of the most powerful exercises I teach. Advanced level teaching and practice. So we'll continue like this now together. Show me your lower self voice. And mock it a little bit, exaggerate it a little bit. That's how you take control. Make it a bit worse than it normally is. Like something like this. When I'm tense, my pitch is a little bit higher. Uh, you know, not that bad. I just exaggerated it. I made it worse than it really is. And then show me your higher self voice. Now, the beautiful thing of this exercise is that you can enter your entire higher self with all its qualities by choosing to deliberately do only one of these things. That is, if I take in my higher self body posture, it usually goes along with all other things of my higher self. My higher self's voice, facial expression, interests, activities, thoughts, emotions, and so forth. That's the beauty of this whole thing. Show me the way you walk in lower self. Some people walk the same regardless of their mood, but many also have a difference, so show me that. Show me your posture and walk in lower self. And then show me your posture and walk in higher self. Now let's do posture, walk, and facial expression at the same time. Show me your expression, posture, and walk in lower self. And then show me your facial expression, your body posture, and walk in higher self. And then again in lower self. Exaggerate the lower self, mimic it, mock it. And now in higher self. You see, it can be fun to practice self-improvement and personal growth. It can be fun to integrate your shadow. It doesn't have to be all trauma work and crying. It can be a fun practice. Can you show me or tell me a couple of websites you visit when you go unconscious, when you're in apathy, when you just don't care, when you're tired, when you're exhausted? That's your lower self wasting time. And can you tell me some of the websites that you visit when you're in a high state, in a good state? When I'm in a good state, I visit my own website to improve upon it. For example, Can you show me or tell me some of the clothing you wear as lower self? And some you wear as higher self. Can you now emotionally get into your lower self, be your lower self, allow for that fear, shame, or anger, or guilt, or sadness, whatever's there, to arise? And can you allow a little more of that to come up, to squeeze out some of those lower emotions, like squeezing out a lemon? And let's not get carried away here. Can you now allow for some of those higher self states or emotions? The joy, the kindness, the compassion, the confidence, the hope, the love, the strength, the courage. Whatever's there, allow it to come up. The lightness you feel in your higher self. Okay, thank you. Now, we've done just a little of this. I recommend much, 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 much more of this practice. You can go repeat the exercise again next week. You can do it as a meditation. You can do it mentally, where you visualize or remember yourself in lower state and higher state, back and forth. You could spend 30 seconds meditating on lower self, then 30 seconds on higher self, then back to lower self, back to higher self. And I myself have done that many, many, many times, contrasting and comparing. Because the more often you show your body, mind, subconscious, low self, and high self, the more easily you naturally gravitate toward higher self. Why is that? Because your body, mind, subconscious are designed and made pro-survival, pro-life, and will always choose what you believe is the better option. And if you ever choose a negative option, it's because you think it's better than something even more negative. You always choose the better option. And even your negative things that you choose are better than even more negative. That's why we show ourselves the high self and the low self. The more often you do this, the more you become your high self. This is a life practice, really. A life practice of being aware of your dual nature, not to the point where you're two people, but to the point where you realize you have an animal side and a spirit side. And there's nothing wrong with your animal side. It's part of you. It's just your pet. And I'd view it as compassionately as I view a pet, because in many spiritual traditions, there's the tendency to think poorly of the animal, to look down upon it, to try to get rid of it. But I recommend the opposite. I recommend integration and kindness toward your pet, having fun with it, as we did in this exercise. And that is lower self and higher self. If you benefited from this practice just now, and also in the weeks and months and years to follow, because I do recommend you use it for that long, once in a while. If you benefited from it, please recommend it to those you like and love.